Hello everyone, welcome to the latest This Week in the Field with the Handyman in the Field. We had a bunch of different things going on this week. As you remember from the last episode, I was talking about how there's a lot of weather coming. If you're not familiar with This Week in the Field, this is the first time you're checking it out. This is a weekly recap series of what I do in my handyman business week to week, specifically talking about the types of jobs that I have, pricing, how much actually the jobs were, and how much money I made for the week. And then I also talk about the variety of other things that come up just as part of running the business of handyman service. So last week, if you didn't check out that episode, I specifically was talking about how I was worried about a lot of weather that was happening this week. We had a lot of rain this past week, and a lot of my jobs that I had planned for this week, because my son was available to work with me. I had a lot of exterior projects that I had planned to complete this week. The rain was going to be a factor, and some of them weren't going to be able to get done. Now, I was able to manage to get some of the bigger ones that were more time sensitive completed, based off of just trying to match out where the weather, how the weather was going to work out. And then I was able to fill in some of the gaps with some other jobs. So that said, let's just go over what we had happen this week. So on Monday, I had a deck repair job. This job was quoted back in October, and he specifically wanted it taken care of this spring because he had a deck that the rails and some of the spindles were, they were specifically, the main thing was there was two pieces of fascia board along the perimeter of the deck that needed to be replaced. They were rotted. He lives in a community that has an HOA that will paint the deck, but they won't paint it if the wood's in bad repair. So the fascia needed to be replaced, and there was a couple of spindles that were bad. So originally I quoted $1150 for that job last fall. That included replacing a couple of the spindles and the fascia. Unfortunately, we had to remove all of the spindles because they were actually attached to the fascia. When we got there, we ran into some immediate problems. There was, the first thing was that just based off of the weather over the winter, because I haven't seen this since October, there was a lot more than 8 spindles. I think there was close to 60 spindles total, and out of the number of spindles that were present, I'd say probably maybe a third of them were in pretty rough shape. The biggest problem that we were running into is that the spindles themselves, while we were removing them, they were becoming damaged because the screws, nails, and lag bolts that were holding everything together were not completely, but very close to completely being rusted out and not actually doing anything structurally, holding anything together. So we ran into that problem. The top rails themselves were having issues. So what we ended up doing was I ended up having a conversation with the homeowner, explain the situation, said that, I could just end up replacing all of the spindles and all of the rails and the fascia board like we originally planned. It would only be a little bit more. And part of that was because the existing labor that I had already charged was going to include removing the spindles in the first place. It was just reattaching them. In some ways, it made things slightly easier because I didn't have to worry about as many spindles or trying to salvage the spindles as much. I could just take them out and it wasn't a big deal. But there was obviously more materials involved. So that job ended up becoming $1,600. The other thing, so here's the before. After we got the rails off, it's hard to tell from the picture because the rails are painted, but the rails and the spindles, they were in bad shape. And obviously from the ground, taking a picture from further away, it's harder to see. But that's the before. After we got the rails off, this is what it looked like. We pulled off the fascia. And then this was what it looked like. The problem was that we ran into another problem, which was that when we were removing the fascia, the part that was probably the worst off from the very beginning, we found a number of small carpenter ants colony that had persisted. So we got a little video. You can see it here. Not a huge thing, but there was a lot of ants that we found, and we had to get rid of those. So we had to brush off as many as the ants as we could, and then we had to basically spray everything with ant repellent to keep them from doing anything. Luckily the ledger boards and all, or not the ledger, the actual joists and everything, there was nothing wrong with them. There was a couple of spots that were eaten, but not all the way through and nothing was soft, so it wasn't as if we had to replace any of that. Structurally, it was still sound. There was no issues with the actual structure of the thing. A lot of it was cosmetic. So we replaced all of the rails, all of the spindles, and the fascia board. And like I said, it ended up being $1,600. That was a longer day. I made the mistake of not grabbing my miter saw, my smaller miter saw that I use, because I originally thought we were only going to have 8 spindles to replace, and then because of that I only grabbed my circular saw because I figured, well, it's just 8 spindles, it's not a big deal. As soon as it became 60, I realized that wasn't going to work, so I had to run back to my shop in order to get the miter saw so that it would go quicker. That cost me an hour out of the day just because I had to go back and forth, and that was like a half hour one-way trip. So that was my mistake for the day. I should have just brought the saw to begin with. There was obviously a lot more, because this was a second story deck, there was also a certain element of, we had to work on a lot of the ladders. So we had to bring 2 different ladders to bring. And then on top of that, at the very end, we had to haul away all the old material. And because of all of the old material that had to get hauled away, the back of my truck was pretty stuffed, and the ladders were hanging out the back because there wasn't a way to get it all in. So all in all, it wasn't a bad day. $1,600. I think there was about $400 to $450 of materials, and then I had labor for my son who was working for me. So but overall, it was not a bad day. I was glad to get it done that day because Tuesday we had a massive storm. So jumping over to Tuesday. In the morning, not related to any business, or related to business, but not making business, I went to a networking group that I'm looking to join a local chapter of. By all means, everything looks like it should, I'll probably end up joining, and it's just a matter of, the fundamentals of getting into it. But it looks like that could generate some more business. And I can also see how I can benefit the people who are there, because I come in contact with people all the time who are asking for specific professionals of things that I cannot take care of. So that was early in the morning, but then the rain hit. And unfortunately, my job for that day was a customer. A couple weeks ago, I did the garage organization, installing a bunch of garage organization. This is the same customer. They insisted on scheduling for Tuesday, even though I said the weather wasn't probably going to cooperate. The stuff that they wanted done is that they wanted a trellis fixed, some trim on a trellis, some supports for some posts, and then they have a cedar swing set in their backyard that has some rotted pieces that need to be replaced. So I did end up showing up to the job just because I'm not going to not show up, and then we just rescheduled for this coming week where there isn't as much rain in the forecast. So that was a wash, didn't have anything. Shortly after that, I did get a phone call from a new customer who is local and had a number of different things that they wanted to get taken care of. So I ended up going out there to take a look at them, do an estimate in person, mostly because I just had the time to kill. They had a slew of stuff that they want to get done. There's some bifold doors that need to get replaced. There's a kitchen faucet that needs to be replaced. There's 2 ceiling fans. There's some gazebo lights that need to get taken down and then put back up. There's a bunch of stuff. That estimate got sent out. We'll see what ends up happening with that. But that's hypothetically something that could be coming up in the near future. And then I also had another job that day that was the faucet job that I started I think it was a week before that, where that job was a leaky bathroom faucet, bathtub faucet, I should say. And that ran into a problem because the customer had only about 30 minutes of time that they allotted for me to be there. And when I texted to confirm, because they had previously canceled the week before, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to run into an issue with scheduling, or specifically coming out and then not being able to, and then not, confirming. And that ended up becoming, well, we need to reschedule because they only allotted 30 minutes and there was no way that I could guarantee that was going to be done in 30 minutes. That ended up being a plus and a minus. The minus obviously is that I didn't have anything else scheduled during that time frame, and there wasn't anything that I could pick up that day. However, the plus was that I made a pretty big mistake when identifying the faucet. When I got the picture from the customer originally showing me what it was, I used ChatGPT to try to identify what type of faucet it was. ChatGPT said it was a Delta faucet, or a shower valve, I should say, and needed a Delta shower cartridge. I had bought a shower cartridge that was supposedly going to fit. And when I went to the house the first time and realized that he didn't have enough time to for me to get done what I needed to get done, I took a couple additional pictures, and that night I was reviewing the pictures that I actually took and noticed that at the very bottom, in just the right light, it just happened to be in the picture, but not something I saw in person. The bottom of the trim kit said price Pfister, which now is just Pfister, but they obviously used to make shower valves. Maybe they still do. I haven't seen any. Normally everybody uses Moen or occasionally Delta, but most of the time it's Moen for shower valves. I noticed that and I realized, well, it can't be, if the trim kit is price Pfister, it's definitely not Delta. So then I tried to search that specific image to try to find a trim kit that would match, to try to recognize which one it was. I was able to find the shower valve, and it turns out it's a super rare valve. Not rare, but it was rare because it was put in the 70s, which makes sense because this house was probably built in the 70s. And it's not readily available, so that was the problem. The plus is that there is a place in Chicago on the north side that's called Faucet Shop, and they have a variety of vintage parts and pieces for different older plumbing fixtures. I've used them in the past when I needed to replace a sink faucet on it was an American Standard sink from like the 50s or 60s, and they were the only place that I could find online that had the exact faucet, because it was back before they had cartridges for the faucet. Again, it was a leaky faucet. That time I ordered it, and and I just had it delivered to my shop, and when it came, I installed it. It worked perfectly. The customer was super happy about the fact that it was, it looked brand new, because obviously it was brand new. So I figured, well, if they have it in stock in store, then I'll just go up there and get it, and that way I have it. It was obviously more expensive than the Delta cartridge because it's vintage, but it did come with an entire trim kit, which would replace the existing trim kit handle and the Echelon plate that goes behind it. So there was that, but it was going to be more expensive than the shower cartridge. So we'll get back to that in a minute. Wednesday, I had a quick job. This is a customer that I had from last year. They previously lived in the town that I'm based out of. They sold that house, and then they ended up moving into a house in the next town over. It's an older customer. She moved from a 2-story house to a 1-story ranch. And she had just a couple of minor things that needed to be done. She had some trim going down to the basement that needed to be painted, because this is a new construction house. The builder, for whatever reason, painted the mop board along the stairs blue, even though all the trim in the house was white. And then the rails themselves needed to be repainted as well. So just painted that, and then there was a single mirror that needed to be hung up. So that was $280. It was a very quick job. Didn't take that much time out of my day. And then after that, I came back, picked up my son, and then we went back to a house that I had previously been at that I fixed a deadbolt, and they had a bunch of other things on their list that they wanted to get taken care of, but some of the items were a faucet that needed to be replaced and a ceiling fan. And they needed to order them, and they got them, and we scheduled it. I specifically scheduled it because this stuff was going to be inside, so if it did rain, it wasn't going to affect it. So what we ended up doing was we started with the ceiling fan. The ceiling fan, this was the before. It was a very old ceiling fan, very ornate though, but it was an old ceiling fan that needed to be taken out. The new fan, very modern, black, 3 blades instead of 5. The only catch was it didn't have a down rod long enough for the vaulted ceiling. So that was something we were going to have to go get. So then we transitioned to doing the kitchen faucet, which also had a drinking water faucet as well. Took out the old ones there. This is what it looked like before, and this is what it looked like after. The new ones but I mean, they certainly look a lot nicer. The only thing that concerns me is that the water content in the area has a tendency to eat that black stuff. Or I shouldn't say eat it up. It has a tendency to wear out the black finish on plumbing fixtures. I've seen this a lot where customers put black fixtures in and it eats away, because unless you're very, very on the ball with like making sure you wipe it down, there's no water left on it, it could potentially leave spots, and it'll just slowly make it, tarnish it to a point where it's not going to look good. But that's what they wanted, so that's what they got installed. Another thing that they had was a mailbox. Their mailbox, it seemed like at some point some birds tried to make a nest out of their house or out of their mailbox. They were using the top of the mailbox as a perching point, but also inside the mailbox in the very back there was a bunch of the problem is that the door to the mailbox kept popping open, so the birds would go inside. They were looking like they were trying to build a nest. So they wanted the old one taken out. They already had a new one that had numbers on it. They just needed it installed. So I just basically took the old one off, modified the plate that was there so that I could screw into it, and then got the new one up. It looked pretty good. Customer was very happy about how that looked. Then we had to run to the store to get the down rod for the fan. Luckily, we were able to get one that worked with the fan because the fan was purchased on Amazon. Sometimes there's issues with compatibility. There wasn't one, fortunately, with this. So we were able to get that set. And then the last thing we did was they had a gas and carbon monoxide detector that they wanted installed in their laundry room. And that was just simply making sure that it was all set up and plugged in, and then got down to, being in the clear. So that got set up. But all in all, everything turned out pretty well. Now, this job does include a first visit where I had like a couple of minor things like a trim repair and the deadbolt fix, and then there was one other small thing that I took care of that time too, diagnosing an issue with the smoke detector. So that total was $740 for all of those items. Now, the thing to note with that is that obviously when it comes to electrical and plumbing stuff, I charge a tiny bit more than, the basic stuff. And I'm actually thinking about restructuring my pricing when it comes to certain things, specifically because there are certain things. I think what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to create a 3-tier system where the first tier is, bare bones. You don't have to have a lot of skills. It just takes time. That would include things like painting, furniture assembly, other types of assemblies, picture hanging, things like that, where there's not a lot of experience that's required, a lot of skill that's required for those, but it's things that need to get done. Now, my current rate that I charge, that stuff makes it very difficult to actually do that kind of work because of that. However, if I brought on an employee who I was paying a certain amount, I could have them do that type of work and charge a lower rate than what I'm currently charging. The middle rate would just be like a little bit more skilled carpentry stuff, repairing things that you have to have a little bit more knowledge on, door adjustments, things like that. And then the top tier would be electrical and plumbing stuff, more advanced carpentry stuff like doors or installing doors, things like that. That would basically be the top tier. So I'm thinking about having 3 different tiers. Deck repair would be in that top tier. Different things like that. It's hard to specifically say because I have to actually like go through and like figure this out. But there are certain things where and then obviously liability could push it into a certain tier. If you're on a ladder and you're 2 stories up, that's going to push it into a different tier compared to a normal tier. So there's certain things that I think that if I was to hire an employee, I would be able to take on these other things that I typically don't take on because I'm just too expensive to do those right at this moment. So that being said, that was $740. The reason I brought that up is because the customer asked if my rates had gone up since the last time I worked for him. And the last time I worked for him was last fall, where basically all I was doing was I installed a pool fence. It's like one of those kits where you customize the mesh and then you have to install posts into the ground. And then at the end of the season, you take it out and you put it back in the spring. Well, in the fall, I had installed it in the summer, but in the fall, I removed it, and then they had a sunroom that screened in, but also has glass panels that they put in during the winter. That was bare bones work. There was nothing really super involved. It was just removing everything and putting it away for the season. So I didn't charge anywhere near as much for the amount of time that I was there. However, that is something that is not the same as like putting in a faucet. There's liability with water involved in that. Electrical is the same thing. There's a certain amount of liability for a ceiling fan or a light fixture hanging from the ceiling. Also, the skill of working with electrical or plumbing and knowing how to be able to turn things off and turn things back on and make sure that everything works properly. That's not the same as, putting something away for the season, seasonal work and seasonal items in the garage or something like that. So he didn't have an issue with the price. It was just more of like a concern of like, did the rates go up a lot higher? And obviously it wasn't just me at this job as well. It was also my son. And while I'm not charging as much for him, in comparison, he's still a body who's he's allowing me to get things done quicker because he's running out to the truck to get things that we need rather than I have to stop what I'm doing and go get what I need. So you're not paying as much for that helper, but at the same time, that helper is there to make sure things are more efficient. Again, I'm not doing an hourly rate, but when I actually try to calculate the amount at the end, it does come out to a certain hourly rate that the customer's unaware of, but it does come down to a specific hourly rate because of what is done. All right, so that was Wednesday. Thursday, this was the second trip for the customer who has a bunch of stuff. I removed cameras a couple weeks ago. One of the things that he had me do was measure some under drawer cabinet drawer slides. Specifically, the whole idea was that he has two big cabinets. They have, they're framed cabinets, but they have two doors, 2 spots, 2 shelves. So there's 4 spots, and he wanted to be able to pull drawers out so that he could put pots and pans in there without having to bend over to get to the back of the cabinet. This was expensive, but it was a lot of it because of the materials. They were pre-made or prefabricated birch drawer slides that came with all the hardware pre-installed. The only thing you had to do was actually mount them to the cabinet. So that was expensive because of the materials. And that was honestly one of the only things that I did that day because a lot of the other things involved paint. And the issue was that there was some paint that needed to be done outside, but it was raining that day and it rained the day before and it was going to rain the day after. So I adjusted the cabinet slides. He also had me haul away some stuff at the end of the day, which he typically always has some stuff he wants me to haul away just to get rid of because he's trying to declutter a lot of stuff in his house. There was a paper shredder that I also set up, but that was just taking out of the box and moving it and ensuring that everything was working and then removing the old one. So that was that. So that total job was $1,360, but like I said, about $650 of that was specifically for the materials for just those drawers. So there's that. So then on Thursday, right after that, that's when I went to that faucet shop place, which was extremely not close. Now, a lot of people assume that when you say you live near Chicago, you live close and everything's close. It's not close. Where I was on the west side of the city, but from there to the north side of the city, which is, and when I say north side, it was actually in the city. The west side was just the western suburbs of Chicago. The faucet shop is on the north side of the city. It was a 45-minute drive to get there. So I got there. They had the part that I needed with no problems. It was real quick. The knowledge that they have, I mean, it's kind of crazy how they have everything organized because they know exactly where everything is, and it's just drawers upon drawers upon drawers of fixtures. Got that, and then from there to get back home, it was an hour and 10 minutes from there. So almost a 2-hour round trip just to get this one piece, which is a pain because the customer didn't even know at this point that there was a different type of cartridge that was needed. So that was that. Friday, that was all I did on Thursday. It was really just driving because by the time I got back, there was nothing else. And it was also, it was raining pretty much all day on Thursday. Friday, I was supposed to have that faucet job. I went there, explained about the situation, but the issue was that there's a lot of stuff in the house, and he has a piece of furniture that's blocking his crawl space to get to his main water shutoff. I need to be able to turn off the water to swap out the valve. So there's that. But then the other problem was that originally we talked about potentially using the curb stop for the water valve, where I would just go on the exterior of the house and use that one. I could not get that one turned for the life of me, and I will be honest, I don't know how often those ever get turned, so I don't really particularly want to be dealing with that one specifically, because if I break it, I'm on the hook with the city to get that replaced, and that's, you know, thousands of dollars for a job that I'm only charging a couple $100s for. So once it wasn't easy to mess with, I told him, you know, we need to get to the other valve. He said that's not a possibility right now, so we had to basically reschedule. My concern is that if we keep putting the job off, I eventually have to return some of these parts that I have for this job, because I honestly don't even know if I can return the part to that faucet shop. I assume I can if I haven't used it. But again, that's a 2-hour round trip to return a part, and I'm still not getting paid for it. So these are those little things that end up like eating away at your profitability, which, you know, that always sucks. So there was that. Immediately after that, I had an estimate for an existing customer who's had a bunch of stuff done, but they are selling their property and moving out in May, and she wanted me to walk through to go over some stuff that she wants done prior to them, or I should say once they have all of their stuff moved out of the house, they need me to get in there just a couple of days before the new owners go, clean out their dryer vent, and then patch all the nail holes and paint and touch up paint what's there. So she just wanted to walk through me with that. That was a unique situation because they sold the house 10 months ago to the current owners, then have been renting it ever since, and they're friends with them. So there's like a understanding that they're trying to make sure the house is in good shape for them to move into. So that job's not going to come up till May, but it was just prepping for that. And then the next thing we had was a job. I went to an estimate a couple weeks ago where the woman had a bunch of encasement windows that she had the frames painted on the exterior of the house, and the painter let the paint dry and all of the windows were dried shut, so she can't open them from the inside. So my son went with me to that job, and we basically went through and we cut out, took a long knife and just basically sliced the paint. And then once the window was able to be open, make sure that there wasn't any buildup, any bumps and stuff that would prevent the window from opening and shutting in the future. There was a couple of windows that were in bad or worse shape that she's going to have to get addressed, because that's beyond something that I can do. It looked like somebody tried to repair some of the wooden frames on some of these windows, but there was just a couple that were in bad shape. There was a couple of seals that were broken, and then there was a couple of frames that were not completely rotted, but very much rotted. And then there was a 3-way switch that was bad that needed to get replaced. I have pictures, but none of these pictures are like super great because it's hard to show a picture of before and after for a switch, but we have the switch. And then the other thing she had a light fixture that one of the bulbs was not working. That was just like a minor adjustment of just adjusting the bulb connection. And I think it's mostly just because the bulbs themselves they're just out of whack when it comes to the actual connection points. So that's relatively simple in that regard. And then the last thing was a change order that she added on, which was she wanted to be able to clean the glass in between the oven door. So we had to basically disassemble the entire oven door to be able to get the 3 pieces of glass out so that she could clean these. That took a little bit of time. I originally quoted that job at $600 for everything except for the oven door. The windows actually went a lot quicker than I anticipated because I thought it was going to take a lot more time. So that brought the price back down. And then the oven obviously added to that. So then there was a little bit more money involved, but it ended up being still cheaper than that. That job ended up being $500 total. The customer was happy about the fact that it was less money than what I told her. And I've said this before, but I try to make sure that my prices are always on the higher end. And then if I can come down, or there's a reason where it makes sense to come down, I can. I'd rather have a customer approve more I don't tell them that because I don't want them to think that automatically it's going to be less than what I'm quoting them, but I want them to be aware of how much it potentially could be. And then if it ends up being, if it ends up taking me 2 less hours, I'm not going to charge for the 2 hours. I know that some people wouldn't necessarily go that route, but I don't want to overcharge a customer, because when they start putting together the math of like, oh, well, they were only here for 3 hours and they charged me $800, they're going to get upset about how much money it is. On the flip side, if you tell them one price, you're there for roughly about the same amount of time or a little bit less, and then you end up lowering the price, some customers can be very happy about that. This customer is one of those customers because she actually raised a concern about how much the windows were going to cost. Now, I had to price it on the high end because I need to be prepared for the worst. And if it didn't end up being the worst, great. But if it ended up being the worst, I needed to make sure that I was covered and was going to make as much money as I needed to. So like I said, that job was $500. So that brings the weekly total to $4,480. And then obviously there's some trips on here that I'll end up making money on later on. But $4,480 for a week's not bad. It's definitely on par with what I'm wanting, which is at the moment $2,000, but I'm looking to extend that as we get into the busier season. Trying to juggle a lot of different things on whether or not I upgrade to getting a van specifically dedicated for work. I'm looking at a commercial property as well. I'm also looking at employing somebody specifically so that I can take on other types of work for the summer. I'm juggling all of these things at once, and I know I can't do all of these things at once. So it's a matter of just trying to figure out what's, obviously the employee is going to make me the most. The other two are just expenses. But I can't necessarily have an employee who I'm not providing a vehicle for, who doesn't have a way of getting around and performing the stuff that I need. But to get a van and to fully deck out the van, that's going to be its own thing by itself. So there's that. Also hire an employee. I've never had an employee other than subcontractors or my son, which is completely different than an actual employee and having to deal with payroll and that. So that's all navigating that stuff at the same time. I did have a couple of new customers that contacted me this week. I actually had a bunch of stuff, and I've been trying to get better about picking up the phone regardless of whether or not they're an existing customer or not. My existing customers will typically text me or leave a message and there was no issues. But new customers, they have a tendency to not text. They don't always, most of the time. Sometimes they will, but most of the time they do not text back or text. They'll just hear the voicemail and then they'll give up. So I've been trying to get better about answering the calls. And when I've been answering the calls, like I've said before, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but I tend to land them pretty quickly. Even if it's just over the phone and I don't have to go there in person. There is a customer coming up this week that is a new customer that is moving from out of town to a new place and needs a bunch of stuff done. And they said that they thought they had enough stuff to keep me busy for an entire day. If that's true, great. We'll see what happens. With that, I have to send that off, but that is probably going to be happening this week. And then there was a couple of other customers that reached out, asked for prices for certain things, gave them prices. We'll see what happens with some of those. But the whole idea is that there's a lot of moving pieces. I'm trying to juggle this aspect of potentially growing at the same time of like, my numbers are great. I'm on average right now making at least double what I think I was making last year at this time. So that's great, but I need to turn that into a way of, growing even further, whether it be getting the employee or whether it be getting something else. So if you guys are watching and you've already grown, I'd love to hear your advice. That's always greatly appreciated. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns about anything that I said, please leave those in the comment section below and I will do my best to respond to those. Preferably in video form. So if you do leave a question, be sure to check out the shorts on the page because I'll answer those there. And then if you would be so obliged, please like, subscribe. That stuff helps out. Share the video. As I've said before, this is a weekly series that comes out every Monday. I think at this point, I'm going to continue to make sure that this is coming out. But if you haven't checked out the Thursday videos are different videos talking about different aspects of like how to start your business, things that I did that you could do or that you could learn from my mistakes and do differently. And if you have any ideas for things that you'd like to have me cover in the future for those videos, be sure to leave those comments in those videos as well. So with all that being said, thank you guys so much for watching to This Week in the Field. I have been the handyman in the field, Dustin, and we'll see you guys next time.